I'm very happy that you have waited all here for this most scintillating and enlightening discussion on a subject that's near and dear to all of your hearts. You're on the edge of your seat, I know, to hear about strategic planning and how to avoid project and program disasters. That may be the more interesting part of it. But before we get started, I'd like to just play a game with you of Leadership Jeopardy. And the category is 6-letter words. And not 4-letter words, 6-letter words. And people say this is the answer, when they hear the words strategic planning. Any questions? Which one?
Boring.
What is boring? You got it. You got it. Well, what I've done, because I know your predilections and presuppositions and prejudices on this subject, so I've enlisted the help of an Old Testament personage to introduce this. He's an individual who has been quoted by a few, or referred to by a few Old Testament scholars as a man of action and the most inspiring and genial personage in the entire Bible, the prophet Nehemiah. And Nehemiah, I would call him, he's a person after my own heart, a man of action, a genial personality, someone who's able to get things done, lived 500 years roughly before Christ, and he was an early strategic planner. His claim to fame was the reconstruction of the walls around Jerusalem after the return of the exiles from the exile into Babylon. And I say claim to fame not being irreverent, but in the book of Nehemiah, the first 3 chapters, he has a very extensive and detailed autobiographical sketch of what he did in order to rebuild those walls. Now, again, I say that he was an early strategic planner because he exemplified many of the characteristics that you really need to have in order to plan and to put your plans into action. And I'd like to go through a few of those characteristics. But first, I want to ask the question, how many people have read the book of Nehemiah? Excellent. And I will promise all of the Reverend Fathers and seminary graduates that there will not be a quiz on this later on. What kind of a person was Nehemiah? If you know the story, he was a cupbearer. He was an official in the court of the Persian ruler after the return from Babylon. And he was a very passionate person. He had heard the story about all of the people in Jerusalem who were suffering. They were in great trouble. The walls of Jerusalem were broken down. The gates were destroyed by fire. And he reacted very, very strongly to that. And he said, the wall of Jerusalem is broken down. I sat down and wept, and I mourned for days, fasting and praying, asking for repentance for the sins of the people of Israel, for their corrupt nature and their practices and so on. And then he decided, however, unlike many of us who complain about things that go on or don't go on, he actually decided to do something about it. And one of the most important things that he did was to connect himself with people who could help him accomplish his objective. And in this case, it was his master, who was the Persian king, and to whom he was a servant, a cupbearer. And he went to the king and said, "O king, send me to Judah with letters of passage that I may rebuild it." And he was very forthright in what he wanted. He wanted access to the king's forest so that he could get wood in order to rebuild the gates for the entry into Jerusalem. So this was a very important thing for him, but he knew that he had to involve other people. And the king was number 1, and the other people who were the king's servants who could help him were number 2. He was observant. He didn't just accept other people's words for what had to be done. He arrived in Jerusalem. After 3 days, he went by night with just a few people, and he surveyed all of the walls of Jerusalem. And he did that in order to satisfy himself as to really what the situation was. He was inclusive. After he did that, he went to the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, and workers, and he said, "You see the trouble we are in. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem." And he got their agreement to do that. He was prepared. He didn't go into it with rose-colored glasses. He knew that he was going to meet with opposition. He knew he was going to meet with threats. In fact, threats against his own life. The enemies plotted, he said, to fight against Jerusalem. We prayed and set a guard. Half-worked, half-held weapons. Each builder had his sword by his side. But he didn't even just limit himself to the work that he was about to do. He was caring. He saw the people who were around him, and he was a representative of the king. And the people came to him, the Jews who were in trouble there, and they said to him, "We have mortgaged our fields, our children are slaves." And Nehemiah was very angry, and he convinced the nobles and the officials to restore the lands, in fact, to forgive even their debts. And he was organized. This is a graphic of the wall of Jerusalem, the walls around Jerusalem, and the various gates. Eliashib, the high priest with his brethren, built the sheep gate. Next to him, the men of Jericho built. Next to them, the sons of Hassenath built the fish gate. And next to them, and next to them, and next to them, 47 total groups of people worked together to rebuild this thing. And it was accomplished. So the wall was finished in 52 days. Passionate, connected, observant, inclusive, prepared, caring, organized, accomplished. A man of action, a man of planning, and a man who included other people. Now, during the time of the Babylonian captivity, Jeremiah had the prophecy from the Lord. The Lord said, "I know the plans I have for you to give you a future and a hope." And that future and that hope was realized in the person of Jesus Christ. But Jesus didn't just want us to just kind of bask in his presence. He gave us jobs to do. And he said to his disciples, "I have appointed you that you should go and bear much fruit, and that your fruit should abide. It should live. It should go on beyond it. You're going to have to leave a legacy. And further, you're not working by yourself, just like Nehemiah didn't work by himself." And he prayed in his high priestly prayer to his Father that they may be one, so that the world may know that thou, the Father, has sent me. So these three things, hope for the future, fruit that's active in the world, and unity among all of us who work, that is the raison d'etre of strategic planning. That is the basis. Oh my goodness. Now we get into bureaucracy and the evil corporate world. Flow diagrams, arrows, boxes. Oh my Lord. Deacon Peter, you had us all enthusiastic about what was happening with Christ and the world and the Old Testament. Oh my Lord, and now here you come up with this stuff here. Well, okay. Let me put it in more simple terms. One of the first things that we do always in strategic planning is vision, values, and mission. And what is that really? It's for us to dig into our collective heart and see what's really important to us. This is the why that we talked about, and Katrina talked about that yesterday. The why is extremely important. And we have to dig. This is not a superficial looking into your heart and saying, "Gee, guys, what do we want to do?" This is digging into our heart. And it's not just our own heart, it's our collective heart, who we are as a people. And see what's important, what's really important, who we are not, what we need to do. And the foundation of that has to be, what is the will of God that we're going to do? The title of my book is Thy Will Be Done, Strategic Planning, Strategic Leadership Planning and Management for Christians. When I was starting to write the book, I was here on the campus, I spoke with Father Tom Hopko, and Father Tom said, "Oh, you're writing a book. What's the title?" And I said, "Thy will be done." And he looked at me and said, "Very dangerous." Because, as St. Paul said, it's an awesome thing to fall into the hands of the living God. We say "Thy will be done" all the time, every time for the Lord's Prayer. But do we really mean it? And that's the whole point of this exercise, is to say, do you really mean it? And what does it mean to you? And what is the Lord saying to you? We have something called a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis. Sounds very, very abstruse, right? Well, it's not. It means to get real about yourself and your world, to face with blunt honesty who you are, what you do well, what you don't do well, what are the opportunities in front of you, and what are the threats that you face. To get real, because we're not living in a fantasy world when we live in the church. Sometimes we do, but we're not supposed to live in a fantasy world. We're supposed to be real. Strategic options for change. Again, very, very fancy words. But what it really means is to be brave and to dare great things. What are the things that we can do? Not just little piddly little things. As St. Paul says, we're not drinking milk anymore. We're at a stage in our life where we're going to eat meat, and where we are going to do something that's going to be different, that's going to be wonderful, that's going to be vibrant, that's going to bring the light of Christ to the world. Be brave, dare great things. And then once we know kind of what we want to do, we need to make that thing specific, goals and objectives, and to implement them. And that's very simple. Say what you will do and do what you said. Very simple. A lot of times we talk, but we don't write down, I have this is the action step, this is the commitment, that's the goal of this. And then once we do that, steward and steering, we have to fill out our report card. Everyone needs a supervisor. Clergy, bishops, lay people, parish councils, nonprofit boards, everyone needs a supervisor. And sometimes we have to be supervisors of each other to help us. We have to fill out our report card. We have to learn from our mistakes and our successes, and we have to change maybe the pattern, the trajectory that we're going in according to that. Now, I'll go now through a few of these things just to illustrate some major points, and then I'll go to the second part of my presentation. In the red line here are the ones that we talked about: dig into your collective heart, be brave, dare great things, get real, vision and values, mission, SWOT analysis, strategic options. But you can't be in an ivory tower. It's always a temptation of people to say, we know what we really want to do. We know what the church demands of us. We know what, and whether that's a parish council or a group of clergy or the bishop or even the board. But that's not good enough. You need to find out what other people are going to think. Nehemiah went to the nobles and the officials and so on. He found out what they were looking for. It was consonant, it was consistent, congruent with what he wanted to do. But if it were going to be somewhat different, things might have to change. And in this little box over here, we have some of the people that might be considered: the board, the council, management, staff, your customers, clients, if you're doing a nonprofit, your parishioners, your donors and your volunteers, who are very often not consulted, when people do planning. And the other thing that I have here is other impacted parties. If you're in a parish, you're doing a strategic plan, do you talk to the other parishes around you, whether they're in your jurisdiction or not? But one critical thing here that I'm assuming is that they're impacted parties, that what you want to do has impact on other people. And if you say, I don't have other impacted parties, that's a good question for you to take a look at. Why don't I have impact on other people? Strategic options. When you do decide to be brave and to dare great things, you need to be inclusive. Again, that word inclusive is going to come up over and over again, and you need to be disciplined. You need to be able to involve other people, not just the experts, but people who are questioning. Are we doing the right thing? Why are we doing it this way? We've done it this way for 10 years. Maybe there's a better way to do it. Is our organization properly set up? Maybe we should do something different. Maybe we should switch roles and responsibilities. And there are other tools, which I won't get into now because we talked about it last time, things like benchmarking, portfolio analysis. And people say, portfolio analysis, that sounds very, very abstruse. And it's basically looking at the activities that we all do and being good stewards of those activities, such that, and we measure, does a certain activity have a high impact or a low impact on our mission? And what kind of resources does it chew up? Does it cost a lot of money? Does it take a lot of human resources? And are we really getting, and I don't want to be crass here, but this is kind of summed up, bang for the buck. You only have a certain amount of resources, of people, and of funds. Are we doing the best job that we can? And the example that I like to use is one that is we see from time to time. For example, should I re-gold leaf my cupola, or should I start a feeding program in our church? Should I expand our fellowship hall at the cost of $500,000, or should I build an outreach center down the block? These are critical decisions that we make, and we need to make them with our eyes open. Goals and objectives need to be actionable and stewardable. They need to be written down. Say what you will do. And one of the things that is really important, who does what, when, and with whom. Who is the person that we're going to work with? And very often this is one of the missing parts of plans and strategies and goals and objectives, is that we haven't identified who on the team we're going to work with. And very often it's assumed we know, but very often that assumption is incorrect. And also, how will you measure success? This is the last slide on the strategic planning overview. You need to steward the performance, and usually recommend to do it on a quarterly basis, annual basis. This is the most difficult part of the overall program, because this requires the utmost in openness, honesty, accountability, and humility to be able to go to whoever the organization is, whether it's a board, whether it's a council, and to say, we said we were going to do this and have this accomplished by this time, and we haven't done this, that, the next thing, we've done something else. What should we be doing? And this is one where you really have to open yourself. You have to be humble. Updating the plan every 3 to 5 years as a minimum, basically because the plan is not a product. There's a process here, and you can see all of these things that are going around in circles. And the reason for that is because you've got to be constantly updating it. It's got to be a living plan. And if it's not a living plan, it's going to be a dead plan. And quite frankly, if you aren't willing to make it that kind of a planning process, my recommendation is don't even get into it. You know, once you put your hand to the plow, don't look back. So what I'd like to do now is to switch to a more practical thing, which I think a lot of you have or undergo, is projects and programs. Projects meaning individual things, like you're building a fellowship center, you're building a new church, you're doing an outreach center, etc. Those are projects. Programs are something that's a little bit more general, and I'll go into a little bit of the difference between the two of them. But first, I want to talk about something that's near and dear to my heart, because I've seen so much of it: bad management attitudes. And one of the first ones is, and I see this very, very much within the church, particularly from bishops and clergy. We don't need to do it the fancy way, too complicated. They see those boxes and the eyes glaze over very quickly. But then what I say to them is that, well, yes, it is complicated, you know, and it's very much similar to the differentiation that you have to have with something simple like Vespers. We have great Vespers. We have great Vespers not at a vigil. We have small Vespers. We have Lenten Vespers. We have all of the various combinations of the matins, and when you serve, Annunciation falls on this day, you do this service and so on. So we in the Orthodox Church are no stranger to complicated liturgical rubrics, okay? So my answer to them is, that's no excuse. We want the project now. Planning takes too much time. And this is something which is a real issue because all of the research into project management says the more time you build into what you want to do, how you design it, how you plan it, the front end of it, the faster it will be done and the cheaper it will be done, and the least resources will be consumed. So this is a very dangerous thing. An analogy of this for pastors who are counseling engaged couples is marry in haste, repent at leisure. An example of lack of humility is, we know everything, why do we have to ask others? And this very happens among boards, among councils, that why do we need to ask other people? And we had this experience when we did the first strategic plan for St. Vladimir Seminary back in 1989, where people felt, well, we need to have a strategic plan because we have a notation on our accreditation. We don't do long-range planning. We're going to lose our accreditation. So would you please, Deacon Peter, write the strategic plan for St. Vladimir Seminary? And what they wanted was a piece of paper that they could submit to ATS. But we said, no, the church will write the plan, and we're going to do this, and we're going to ask all these people. Why do we have to do that? We know what we want to do. Well, the thing is that what the church wanted was different from what the local administration and faculty wanted. But what we got as a result was a $20 million capital campaign out of that because it responded to the hearts and the desires of the people. This is intellectual bankruptcy at work. Just take the last plan and change a few numbers. So I don't even want to go there, but it happens. Then the last one is very honest. Nice binder. It'll look good on the shelf. And that's what you don't want. You don't want a binder that you can just show to people and say, oh, isn't this nice and it's fancy, we did strategic planning. But it's the process that's really important. Now, one of the issues is communication. I talk about being inclusive, who does what and with whom and so on. So, the words in Cool Hand Luke, what we have here is a failure to communicate. Is very applicable sometimes. So I just have this little graphic here just to illustrate some of that. What the owner wanted. It looks like a Hyundai Elantra. A nice little car, gets you where you want to go, safe and so on and so forth. What the budget allowed for. Okay, maybe it might be a Harley Davidson. What the timing allowed for. What the architect designed. It looks like a Lamborghini to me. That happens a lot. What the owner finally got. So, okay, that's tongue-in-cheek, but let me give you some statistical results. Consultant studies have shown, particularly for large projects, but the same is true for small, projects don't normally go well. This was a PricewaterhouseCoopers study that was done about 5 years ago, in which they took a look at really major mega projects over $1 billion. We have a lot of them, unfortunately, in our federal government. 50% of those major projects overrun by 50% versus the cost that was budgeted. And this little graphic shows 75% of projects overrun by 25%. So if you're counting on meeting that budget, this says you better be careful. 50% overrun more than 50. Over a third of projects overrun by 75%, and a full 10% overrun by 100%. Now, you might say, what happens with smaller projects? Well, McKinsey and Oxford, University of Oxford, did another study about the same time. And they looked not only at they did it for IT projects greater than 15 million, which are very, very measurable. You know exactly what you're going to get out of it. And they looked not only at the cost overruns, but they looked at benefits, project benefits. Project benefits fall short by half for large IT projects. The average cost overrun was 45%. The average shortfall in expected benefits was 56%. Well, I talked to someone in the government, federal government on this, who's involved in technology, and he said, you know, we really don't have that situation in the federal government, these big projects. We always meet our benefits. So I said, well, how do you do that when you have these statistics? And he said, very simple, we just spend more money. And so the overrun is not 50%, it's more like 100%. So beware, beware. I'm going to give you 4 major causes of project problems. One is over-optimistic budget cost and timing estimates. When you go to your architect or your construction manager or your engineering firm, you should ask them, when they give you a number, let's say it's $500,000, $1 million, whatever it is for the project, give me what you have done in the past in terms of your estimates and then the final as-built cost. And so in other words, you said on a typical other project, $1 million, what was it? Was it $1 million, 900,000, or was it $1.5 million, or overrun 50%? If they don't give you that number, that means they don't care about whether it overruns or not. They just want to give you a nice glitzy design, a nice picture, and it's watercolored with trees and so on, but they haven't done the hard work of saying, am I giving you a right number? Unclear scope and deliverables, and this is where doing things in the beginning is very important. We call it scope creep, where you say, oh, it's a really nice building, but ooh, can we have an extra little portico out there? And let's have some more audiovisual here. Those changes cost a huge amount of money. Lack of adequate owner oversight. And this particularly is true in the case of a lot of church projects where you figure, I can trust the architect, I can trust the engineers, I can trust the general contractor, and you give them the project, you sign the contract, you walk away expecting in a year it's going to be done, and lo and behold, it's going to take 2 years and it's going to cost another 50% because you didn't bother to have the discipline to go and to talk with them and oversee what they're doing. Inadequate anticipation of problems and issues. There's nothing, if something can go wrong, it will go wrong. So you will have labor problems, you will have strikes, you will have shortages of materials, you'll suddenly discover ancient archaeological relics under your excavations. These things happen, and you need to be able to plan for those. So, last one on projects. This is the key steps. Check against the strategic plan. Make sure that you're not just reacting to somebody's idea, I want to do this, I want to do that. Is it in accordance with the strategic plan that you've already decided upon? Take off your rose-colored glasses. What can go wrong will go wrong. Be a good steward of your projects, of your resources. We talked about this before. Front-end load your project design. Measure twice, cut once. A rule of a very good carpenter. Measure twice, cut once. Appoint a responsible gatekeeper, somebody during the project who has the responsibility to take a look at where the project is going, and where when some people say, I want to make this change, that change, or even if the project looks like it's going downhill fast, you may want to have someone you will want to have someone who has the responsibility to just say, that's it, the project's dead, it's over. Bring in periodic cold eyes reviewers. This is a really, really important thing, where you have people who are not associated with your project at all, but who have built similar projects someplace else. It might be in the same city, it might be in a different state, but you bring them in every 6 months or every quarter or whatever you decide, and they are the ones who come in and they tell you, yeah, we did exactly what you did, we ran into this problem, that problem, and your design here is lacking in this and that. Again, what is required to do that? Humility. Humility is required to have someone else come in and say, you're not doing it right. And that requires, a humble heart, which is what we're supposed to have, right? No changes unless really necessary. Change is the enemy of good project management. And lastly, learn from your mistakes and successes. And it's best if you learn from other people's mistakes, not your own. So hopefully you'll have success. Now, I want to talk about programs. Programs could be like an outreach program. I want to do an outreach program in our community. Managing programs is far more complex than projects. If you got a little bit of a headache when I was talking about all the issues there, the headaches get magnified when you talk about programs. Focus and scope of projects on the left, highly objective, well-defined. Programs are strategic and wide-ranging, a lot more difficult. The deliverables, the benefits, the timing are much more better defined for a project. You're going to build a building, you know what it's going to look like. When it's a program, you're talking about mission. And that's why it's really hard to dig into your collective heart and see what's really important. What is the mission? What are we really trying to accomplish? The benefits are predicted. They're going to change over time as your environment changes. The community you're serving changes. The community in which you operate changes. It's going to evolve. And the timing usually extends over years, so a lot more difficult. Change. Change is to be avoided, I said, in projects. Change is inevitable in programs. It's inevitable, and you need to be ready to anticipate and to deal with change. Success factors, again, are different because it involves mission, but most importantly, not only mission, but cash flow. You need to be able to survive, particularly when you're in the early stages of an entrepreneurial effort. So that's that. Now, key steps to avoid, this is the next to the last slide. Key steps to avoid program disasters. What did I say before? Check against the strategic plan for a project. It's exactly the same thing for a program. Evaluate your programs as part of an overall strategic portfolio. Avoid programmatic creep. People will say, oh, this is very nice. This feeding program is really nice. Why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? So you need to be able to evaluate each one, rigorously analyze new program proposals like projects. Otherwise, things may get out of hand. This is very critical when we're doing outreach, to establish disciplined policies, processes, and procedures. Very often, we go in with a warm and generous heart, and we go into community, we do something that's different. We have a youth program, we're going to do something that's really different, but we haven't really set it up so that it can continue over time. Remember what Jesus said, that you should bear much fruit and that your fruit should abide. It should live. It should outlive the people who found it, who started it. It has to continue for a long, long time. And the things that we personally, my wife Tanya and myself, have started, and which sometimes have cratered, crashed and burned, was because the procedures really and the people were not really brought into the equation. And that's very, very disappointing. And if you have people who are donors to those efforts, and those efforts crash and burn, you'll never get any funds from those people ever again. So you need to establish that. You also need to measure and steward your program deliverables so that you say what you will do, and you're going to do what you say. This last one is the hardest one. Be prepared to terminate programs if they're not viable. Things change. People change. And if they're not viable, you may have to terminate them. Last year, we had a case study of the Jane Addams Hull House in Chicago, which was, it existed for 112 years, and then it declared bankruptcy a few years ago. And one of the reasons was that they just kept all of this programmatic creep going. They didn't carefully look at their finances. They really didn't involve their board, and so on, and they were not prepared to terminate the programs. And again, a lot of it is due also because people are involved. We all care about people. We care about the volunteers. We care about the people who may be existing even on the stipendiary fees that we pay them to operate an outreach center or something like that. But to be fair to those people, you need to be prepared to consider and separate them from the programs if it's not going in the right direction. Case of Jane Addams Hull House. Everybody was fired. They didn't have any health plan. They didn't even pay them the last few weeks because they just didn't have the money. And that was an example of a very, very poor board oversight. My last slide. I'm going to jump up now to a nonprofit board, the critical planning responsibilities of a nonprofit board. And I've got three major areas here. There's a paradox in board governance. You need to think broadly, but you need to not lose sight of the critical details, especially in a board or an operation that's in early stages of operation. And the critical thing is to question, question, question. Someone once told me, the only stupid question was the one that you didn't ask. And this sometimes is annoying for people. If you're a new trustee on a board that has been operating for 10 or 15 years, they may say, well, you're the newbie, just keep quiet, and we'll take care of it. Not acceptable. Every single one on a board has exactly the same fiduciary responsibility, whether you're a new one or whether you're an old one. The board is not a rubber stamp for administration, but neither should it be a micromanager. So the board has to tread this very interesting line between its broadness and its detailed responsibilities. The other responsibility is to focus on people. I talked a lot about people as part of the strategic plan, to be inclusive, to spread your net, to seek other people's input. And the board has the responsibility, as well as the administration and management, of focusing on people at all levels of the organization, particularly in terms of transitioning and growing people from one level to another level. Volunteers and donors, we sometimes think of them almost as a pair of hands, one actually doing the work, the other one's reaching into their wallet or writing a check. But we need to transition them to a much higher level of responsibility to be ambassadors and to be leaders. And we need to work continuously to maintain a strong bench for succession. In the ExxonMobil Corporation, once a year, every manager had to put together a succession plan for his or her position. They had to identify 3 people for their job and when they would be ready to take over that position, what training they recommended, what other operational experience they recommended. Ready now, ready 1 to 3 years, ready 3 to 5 years. Many times we operate, and we heard that in our little, about the youth worker. Suddenly the youth worker leaves, and youth director, and who's going to take their place? The thinking for that should have been done a year before on a continuous basis. What happens when John or Mary gets hit by a bus, or they have a job reassignment, or their mother gets sick and they've got to move to a different location? We need to think in advance in the future in order to make sure that our fruit shall abide. Last thing, the board needs to work hand in glove with management. There's no us versus them, there's only we. And there are 3 functions of the board which are akin to ministerial leadership in the church: oversight, service, and sacrifice. Oversight, you have to be a bishop. The bishop is the guardian, the overseer, the shepherd, the one who really takes care. And one of the legal responsibilities of a board is the so-called duty of care. You need to care for the organization. Service. One does not sit on a board. One does not be on a board. One serves on the board. So there is a diaconal function here that the board satisfies. It's the service. Like Isaiah, chapter 6, here I am, send me to serve. Sacrifice, the vocation of the priesthood, who offers up spiritual sacrifices and gifts for all of the people. And every board member sacrifices their time, their energy, their experience, their financial resources in order to satisfy the greater good. So if you want to look at what the royal priesthood of the laity is, I say it's in very much exemplified in the role of a board member. So I wish all of you well in your journey, and time for Q&A.
Thank you very much, Protodeacon Peter. Is it working? Yes. Okay, great. I was fascinated by this. For folks who don't know, my name is Emily Custeradze. I have a similar background. I came from BP, worked in projects, and in BP we saw those same slides that looked at projects and how they would overrun in time. So these are straight out of the corporate world. And I have to say, when we looked at these slides in BP, they showed those slides and they showed ExxonMobil way at the top that didn't overrun as much and didn't overspend. So what we got today was actually the best practice in project management. So thank you very much.
If I could just say a little bit more about that, please stay, Emily. This wasn't always the case. And I remember, oh gosh, this is a long, long time ago. And one of our managers for the United States came out and said, "You'll never guess what we've just done." And I said, "What?" We did benchmarking of ourselves through an independent consultant of how we do projects versus what other people, not just in the oil industry, but chemical industry, other major comparable manufacturing industries. And we were in the bottom of the third quartile. Now, Exxon does not like bottom of the third quartile. We want to be number one or number two, because we have a quest for excellence. Not just to make a lot of money, Father Josiah, but we want to be responsible to our stakeholders, and stakeholders include shareholders, of course, but it also includes employees, suppliers, vendors, our customers, our clients, the greater community, and so on and so forth. And people can talk about how Exxon responded to climate change and all that sort of thing. I'm not going to get into that. But on the operational level, there's a very strong sensation of responsibility to people. Well, at any rate, this benchmarking said we were way low. And this went like a shock wave throughout the company. And again, look at your report card. Learn from your mistakes and your successes. In this case, big mistake. So we instituted a new project management system, which was a sea change in the way that our attitudes were about projects, where we used to rush into projects. Now we took our time. And it took so much self-discipline because people wanted to run, and we said, slow, slow, slow. And we are now, and within about 3 years, we were at the top. So thank you very much, Emily, for that. But the lesson to be learned here is that you really, really need to look inwards at yourself and what you do. And you need to be honest. You need to be brutally frank. And again, that's why we go to confession, right? Nobody says make up stories for confession. You say really what's in your heart and what you've done. Thank you, Emily. I appreciate that.
I do have a question as well. But I wanted to say this is the perfect example of how this conference is about business and faith and how can they work together. This is the perfect example of how we can learn from the business world. So my question is, and I realize I take a risk in asking because you're also consultants for strategic planning, do you think an organization can do this themselves with the help of your book, perhaps? People working together can do their own strategic planning, or is it required to have somebody from outside who has those cool eyes to work them through it?
Well, I think it's what they say, horses for courses. Every single situation needs to be looked at differently. I wrote the book because $26 on Amazon.com. and also St. Vladimir's, but maybe Father Chad will give you a discount. I don't know. And just in case you think I'm being self-serving here, I am, of course, but all of the royalties are turned back to St. Vladimir Seminary, so I don't get any of that. It all goes to St. Vladimir Seminary. But the question was, do you really need outside counsel? And I think in the book, and my experience is that it's very helpful to have outside counsel. And one of the issues for me personally, and that's one of the reasons, motivations for writing the book, was I was called upon to be the outside counsel for a lot of people and organizations, and it really doesn't work that way. And what my dream is, in all of what we're doing in leadership, is we need to train the trainers. We need to train people who are going to be able to lead those strategic planning retreats, workshops for parishes. We need people who are going to be able to lead fundraising and stewardship seminars. We need people who are going to be able to lead how do you set up an outreach center, a feeding program, clothing distribution, shelter. How do you going to counsel individuals and even see what individuals are in need, particularly teenagers. And Michelle, Faith Tree, Michelle is here, is right knee-deep into that right now. And how are we going to get that message into there? You can have a central coordinating function, but it's got to go down to the parish level, to the organization level, and we need people who are going to take the first step. When I first got into this, I was already many years working for strategic planning in Exxon. And then the opportunity came up of St. Vladimir Seminary. And I had to take what I had learned there and I had to change it into a seminary environment, a nonprofit. And I think it's a useful recipe. And again, it's a recipe. You can change it. You can put garlic instead of onions and whatever you want to do. But the basic principles are there. But I had to do it. And I'm sure that I made mistakes. And I know I made mistakes. We're all going to make mistakes. But unless we actually go out and try to do something, and to do something in your parish, and to do something for your nonprofit organization, it'll never work. But I think there is the very strong feeling that I have, you need to train the trainers, and we need to have that. Everybody else has it in the world. Corporations have it, large Protestant churches have it, etc. We, unfortunately, except in a few situations that I can name, we don't have it. So,
I feel like in the church sometimes there's a tension, because I myself am, I'm in the business world. I'm very much a planner. Oftentimes, if you read the saints, though, or if you hear, the way our bishops think about things, sometimes it seems like they're kind of anti-strategic planning. They say, well, let God be the planner, and you just focus on the now, and God's plan will be better than yours anyway. Honestly, that sounds like nonsense to me, but maybe I'm missing something. So I was just curious to hear your perspective on it.
Yes, God will provide. And what God provides here is the opportunities for us to work. God provides us the opportunities to plan and to lead and to do something. God does not provide the opportunities for us to sit on our rear end and to say, it's too hard, it's too difficult, I don't know what I'm going to do, I don't know where the money's going to come from, but God will provide. That to me is one of the worst cop-outs that I've ever heard. And I tell the bishops that it's a cop-out. And that's why when we're walking towards each other on the street, they walk over to the other side. But I think it's true. I mean, if the Lord said, I have appointed you to go and bear fruit, he wants us to go and bear fruit. I mean, really, look at the words. It's just like, and look at Paul. Paul could have sat after he was converted in Damascus and just said, God will provide. He'll bring all of these people in, all these Gentiles in to be Christians. He didn't do that. He went on outrageously difficult journeys, missionary journeys. He was thrown into jail. And he didn't just say, God will provide. He said, God will provide me. God provides me to go and to speak to the Gentiles. God provides us to go out, and you as a priest, and you as a deacon, and as a layperson, to go out and to get off our rear ends and to do something for the church. And then God will provide. So, sorry, gentlemen and ladies. I think we'll get that.
Can I ask you real quick to give us the differences between vision, mission, goal, objective? Because to me, the layman in this, vision and mission are the same in my mind, and goal and objective seem to be the same for me as well. They're all synonyms. So can you define and break those four down for us real quickly?
Yes, they're all in here.
I knew you were going to say that.
No, vision is number one. Vision is number one. It's what is your dream for the future? What is the why? Why am I here? Why are we here? What is our dream? Okay, the values are basically those fundamental principles that motivate and orient and energize us inside that we would rather die than violate, like honesty, accountability, love, mercy, whatever they are. And it has to be defined for every single different organization. Mission is basically something that comes from vision and values that says, okay, this is our vision, this is our values, we need to have something that's like a compass. It's just like you're on, you're in a plane, and in the old days, you didn't have GPS, and you'd have to say, okay, I want to go over there, and if I want to go to Hawaii, I have to put myself in this particular direction. And of course, I might have storms, and storms might take us off my course, but then I have to reorient. So mission is basically a statement of what you do, and it's basically a compass sort of bearing. Goals and objectives, people define them in different ways, but the goals is basically, for example, you want to establish an outreach center. That is your goal. Your goal is within 3 to 4 years, you want to establish an outreach center in your parish. The objectives would be, what are you going to do with feeding? Are you going to start with feeding 1 day a week? The second year, 3 days a week. Fourth year, it's going to be a permanent fixture. What are you going to do with clothing distribution, et cetera? Are you going to rent a place? Are you going to try to find a permanent place to do that within 3 to 5 years? So the goal is kind of an overall program end, and the objectives are more detailed ones that you put under it. And again, the reason why we want to do that is, and I've been through so many of these, in which people don't take the time to do it, but once they do it, it's nice binder, it'll look good on the shelf, and they don't come back every quarter in a parish council meeting and to say, how did we do? And again, a lot of times people, let's be frank, they don't want to embarrass the individuals who were given the responsibility. And to my mind, if we're brothers and we're sisters and we love one another, you don't say to somebody who's in their car going off a cliff, oh, I don't want to tell you put on the brakes, or I don't want to tell you, well, my wife Tanya knows it very well, I'm going down a road and she says, you got to take the next right-hand turn, right? And I said, yes, thank you very much. But sometimes she won't say anything and I'll go speeding by. And she says, what happened there, But so you have to show mercy to each other, and one of the merciful things that we do for each other is to help keep us all on the same track. So, Father, I hope that answered in part.